各位来宾、各位媒体朋友们，大家上午好。Distinguished guests, dear media friends, good morning. 感谢大家参加本次的 CCG 全球名家对话系列活动。Welcome to CCG Global Dialogue Events. 本次活动的嘉宾是巴黎政治大学国际事务学院院长、西班牙外交、欧盟与合作前部长、世界贸易组织总干事、前办公室主任阿兰查·冈萨雷斯。Today our guest is Dean of Paris School of International Affairs at Sciences Po, the former Spanish Minister of Foreign Affairs, the former Chief of Staff to the Director General of the World Trade Organization, Ms. Arancha González. 下面是致辞环节，有请全球化智库的秘书长苗绿博士为我们介绍嘉宾。Next is the opening remarks session. Let's welcome Dr. Mabel Miao Lü, the co-founder and Secretary General of CCG, to introduce our guest. Please.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Welcome to CCG and welcome to join us for the CCG Global Dialogue series. Today we are so pleased and it's a great privilege to invite Mrs. Arancha González to join us and deliver a speech at the Center for China and Globalization. She will introduce her new book. We are so hope to look at and know more about this new book and engage in the dialogue and discussion on global trade-related topics with Dr. Henry Huiyao Wang, the founder of CCG. And please allow me to introduce about Mrs. Arancha González. Mrs. Arancha González is the third dean of the Paris School of International Affairs of Sciences Po and the first woman to lead the world's third school for politics and international studies. Prior to joining PSIA, Mrs. González served as Spain's Minister of Foreign Affairs, European Union and Cooperation. She previously was Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations and Executive Director of the International Trade Center. Between 2005 and 2013, she served as Chief of Staff to the Director General of the World Trade Organization, Pascal. Before that, she held senior positions at the European Commission in the areas of international trade and development. Mrs. González started her career as a lawyer in the private sector and has been a member of PSIA's Strategic Committee since 2017. We know that Mrs. González also on the steering committee of Paris Peace Forum, as a lot of people, including Pascal Lamy and Justin Vassy from Paris Peace Forum, stand on this stage for the public speech. And so we are so pleased, and it's our great privilege to invite Mrs. González deliver his public speech in CCG. Welcome, Ms. González. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for this great invitation to be part of the CCG family. It's my first visit to China as Dean of the Paris School of International Affairs in Sciences Po. It's obviously not my first visit to China, but I certainly am very happy to be here at a time when the world is going through a lot of turbulence. We are seeing the impact, devastating impact of climate change. We are seeing the multiplication of conflicts in many parts of the world, including the return of war in particular, but not only in the European continent, a war that we thought was behind us. We have seen a pandemic that has devastated not only our health and led to lots of suffering in everywhere around the world, but also has had a tremendous impact on our economies. We are seeing rising geopolitical tensions. We are seeing gaps related to income growing income inequalities in many parts of the world. Thus, is a world that is in a lot of flux, in a turbulence. And obviously, in this world that is in search of a new world order, international trade is one of the fault lines of this new world in the making. This is why I was very tempted to put a few thoughts on a handbook that I have recently published. It's called Making Trade Work for Prosperity, for People, and for Planet. And the message in this book is a very simple one. Trade, which has been an incredible vehicle for prosperity, for lifting billions out of poverty, for generating growth, for helping with innovation, competitiveness, can continue to be this incredible tool. But we now need to make sure that we harness international trade. We harness to make sure that it responds to the concerns that many have on the climate change front, that we make it work towards planet, that we harness international trade to make it also work for all and not just a few. Now, this is a bit let's say, the challenge we have ahead of us. As I said, trade has been an incredibly effective tool for prosperity and for global development. But also, we have seen how international trade has now become a source of weakening others. We have seen the weaponization of international trade. So we have seen how much it has helped others, but we have also seen that others have lost in this process. We have seen these many faces that international trade has. So the question is, trade like globalization has all these many faces, for good and for less good. How can we harness all these forces? And this is a bit the task that we have ahead of us. And I like to sum it up in 3 steps. It's almost like if we had to do a dance with 3 steps, not just with 1 step. In the past, it used to be just open markets and the rest will follow. Today, we have to be a little bit more sophisticated. Step number 1 is obviously to make trade possible. And we make trade possible when we open markets through unilateral trade policies, but more often through bilateral agreements or through multilateral negotiations. That's what makes trade possible. When we agree to reduce collectively or bilaterally, originally, the obstacles to international trade. Traditionally, we have done this in the World Trade Organization, multilaterally. And it is true that today, multilateralism in the area of trade, like multilateralism across the board, is suffering a lot of headwinds. We are hearing many declare the WTO too inefficient, not good enough, not modernized enough. And I think our collective task is to make sure that we have today a WTO that is fit for purpose. And fit for purpose in the WTO means that the members of the organization make trade possible, which is what the WTO does, by focusing on a few areas that today are at the forefront of the disagreements between the members. How can we make sure that the rules of international trade and our aspiration to protect climate change are compatible? Climate change is our existential threat. So we need to deal with climate change. We've agreed to do this in the Paris Climate Agreement. We have agreed, every member of the international community has agreed to take national measures to reduce emissions and to help us keep the temperature of the Earth below an increase that is no more than 1.5 degrees centigrade. But these national measures we are seeing today can have big spillover effect on others. So we need to find the spaces, and I think the WTO is a good place to do that, where we ensure some sort of compatibility between the measures that different countries take to protect against climate change, so that we don't do this through beggar thy neighbor policies, but we do this in a manner that will help all members of the international community fight against climate change, and do this while preserving our possibility to maintain more sustainable growth, including through trade. WTO is also confronting the need to discipline a little bit better industrial subsidies in general, and industrial subsidies in particular. It's clear that to achieve this climate transition, to achieve the digital transition that many countries are embarked on, incredible amounts of public financing are being used. And how we use this public financing will matter a lot to whether or not this transition works for every country or not just for a few countries. And this is why the WTO needs to look a little bit more attentively at disciplines around industrial subsidies, so that it helps all countries achieve these massive transitions that we have ahead of us. WTO is also at the moment confronting a dispute settlement that has lost a little bit of shine compared to the system as it was set up in 1995. The WTO dispute settlement is not just a very unique dispute settlement, it's a very effective one in making sure that businesses, whether they are big, and more importantly, whether they are medium or small, countries, whether they are big, and more importantly, whether they are medium or small, can fight with the law as opposed than with pure force. And this is why it's important that WTO members also look at the reform of the WTO dispute settlement, so that it can help members in finding a way to deal with their trade differences and prevent those trade differences from escalating into trade wars, which is, as we know, detrimental to everyone in the international community. WTO members also need to look at how they will consider national security. Every country wants security for itself. And it's understandable that every country wants to have the ability to protect its own security. But how every country does that matters to the others too. This is why in WTO, there was an exception to the WTO rules to be invoked in the cases where national security with capital N and capital S was at stake. The impression I have looking at the situation today is that this exception has been interpreted in such a wide way that may end up being the rule and emptying a lot of the force that WTO rules have in ensuring a level playing field for all its members. So WTO members need to have a bit of a look at how to deal with national security. Some would say this is a very tall order. I would say that, judging from the last ministerial conference that took place at the WTO last year, where a big deal was achieved to cut subsidies that contribute to overfishing, showed that when there is a will, there is a way for members of the WTO to get to a result. That's what they demonstrated last year, where China and the US, Ukraine, Russia, the European Union, every member of the WTO agreed to this deal to cut subsidies that contribute to degradation of our biodiversity. So I think it's possible, but we need to create the spaces where this possibility translates into action to modernize the rules of international trade. But here we are still in the step one of this dance in international trade, which is about making trade possible. We still need to make trade happen. And this is not only about trade agreements, it's also got to do with the investments that are necessary on the trade infrastructure, on the customs infrastructure, on digitalizing those customs and making them more speedy, on trade finance, which is the part of finance that is the lifeblood for international trade. So in addition to making trade possible through trade agreements, through negotiating in the World Trade Organization, there is still a second step to be undertaken to help businesses of all sizes, big, small, medium, micro, men entrepreneurs, women entrepreneurs, join international trade. And it's important that they can do it because we know that at the end of the day, participating in international trade is the more lucrative part, is more lucrative than just being confined to very often very small domestic markets. So step two for governments, for private sector, is to ensure that they make trade happen. But this is not enough. There is a third step, and this is a very important third step that, in my view, we have underestimated over the years. And this has to do with making trade work for all. We know that opening markets generate quote unquote winners, but we also know that open markets, advances in technology, advances in digitalization, advances like we are seeing now on artificial intelligence, on robotics, also mean that others will, quote unquote, lose. Now, how we manage those transitions matters a lot for the legitimacy of policies to keep markets open. So what we have seen is that in countries where measures have been taken in the form of strong social safety nets to help this transition, legitimacy for open markets has been greater. And in countries where social safety nets are not robust enough, there is a lot of resistance to keep markets open. So the third and most important step, it's a step that's not in the hands of trade ministers. It's not in the hands of trade negotiators. It's not in the hands of very often businesses. It's in the hands of whole of the government approaches to strengthen social safety nets, to improve education, to improve healthcare coverage, to ensure there is a possibility for those that lose their jobs to be retrained and be joining again the labor market. Taxation policies that are fair. This is also what we need to get right. So I think we are at the moment seeing a lot of pushback on open markets, on international trade. I think we need to listen to this pushback, but more importantly, we need to make sure that we respond to that. And in my view, judging from history, the response will not come from closing our markets. The response will not come from protectionist policies. The response will not come from beggar thy neighbor policies. The response will come from our collective ability to build new rules that make trade possible, from investing in making sure that these rules translate for all parts of our economic tissue, and more importantly, from our collective ability to provide the necessary social safety nets at home and abroad. So this, in a nutshell, is the challenge that is confronting all of us today at the time when it's true that geopolitical rivalry is on the rise. And as I like to say, the laws of geopolitics may have changed, but the laws of economics have not. So if we want the laws of economics to continue to be effective, we need to collectively find a way to manage geopolitical turbulence. This is the message that I think fits well with an audience like CCG, and an organization that has long worked on making sure that we have a more balanced, more equitable, more sustainable globalization, which is in reality what we have ahead of us. Thank you very much for this opportunity to be with you today, and very much looking forward to the dialogue that will follow.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Your Excellency, Mrs. González. You deliver a wonderful speech, not so long, but very candid and very solid about the global trade. Especially you mentioned how to harness the global trade for the people, for planet and prosperity for all. That is very important, urgent issue for everybody right now, especially how to make the global trade resilient. That is everybody concerned that. Later, we would like to move for another phase, is that the our founder, CCG's founder, Mr. Huiyao Wang, in dialogue with Mrs. González. Let me introduce a little bit about the CCG Global Dialogue Series, which is initiated in 2021. CCG has initiated the CCG Global Dialogue Project, in which CCG President Huiyao Wang has engaged in rational, objective, and in-depth conversation with dozens of international thought leaders. The viewpoints shared by this dialogue are invaluable for comprehending the evolving trends in global development. Among the distinguished dialogue guests, including like Thomas Friedman, Graham Allison, John Thornton, Joseph Nye, Pascal Lamy, Kishore Mahbubani, Martin Orff, Justin Vassie, and Hank Paulson. Of course, today we are so glad to invite distinguished guests, our female leader and female trader, of course, the female distinguished educator, Mrs. González. It is believed that by understanding the insights of this dialogue, comparing and constructing their perspectives, a deeper understanding of this critical topics such as globalization, global governance, and multilateralism, and world economy and transnational threats faced by humanity, and EU and US-China relation can be achieved. So the floor is yours, Henry and Ms. González.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Miao. And so it's give me an extreme great pleasure to host the very distinguished Your Excellency Arancha. We are so pleased now you come to CCG personally, and we're going to also put this on the social media and also on the CCG website. So it's really important that you're coming at a very right time. And now China opens up, but of course, as you said well in your speech, that the world has changed a lot, and geopolitics has changed a lot. And but the globalization, you know, we are a promoter of globalization. You have such a so impressive professional career. You've been you know, for European and international affairs, but also you know, served as top position at WTO for many years, and of course also United Nations, and you know, very international career. So what I would like maybe to, you know, talk with you is that how do you think that the world we are going to go? Because since the Bretton Woods system, I mean, World Bank, IMF, WTO has really carried us for a long time now, and then now we're having a lot of challenges, and then you know, the world has been fragmented also into different regional trading blocks, but can we really overcome that? Of course, WTO, this is the backbone of globalization. You've been a top expert. You are also the dean of the one of the most famous school in the world. So probably give us a bit of general, your views on the how we can promote globalization, and you already talked a bit of that. But also I would like to highly recommend your book, Making Trade Work for Prosperity, People, and Planet. So making trade work for 3P, right? So this is an excellent book. I just glanced it and I found it's very stimulating. So probably give a bit of an overview of this, and then also how do you see the globalization forward to start with, and we'll talk a bit more on other issues as well. So Arancha, please. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Henry. And let me tell you that it's true that we are seeing a lot of a narrative about globalization that goes in the direction of division, fragmentation. We hear about deglobalization. We hear about friendshoring. We hear about nearshoring. We hear about fragmentation. We hear about pluralization. And the noise is very loud. When we look at the data, for now, the data is not showing us. Data is showing much more resilient economic ties that are in some ways probably moving from one country to another, but not necessarily going back national. So the rhetoric is very nationalistic. The economic data is still showing interdependence. And maybe this is because, this global connectivity that we have built over the last decades is very sticky. It's very difficult to undo because it has a logic. It has a logic of comparative advantages. It has a logic of value chains that have been invested by companies through very heavy investments in the last decades to make them work. So we are seeing a divorce between the narrative that is going in the direction of division and the data that still shows a lot of interdependence. I guess our task is to make sure that our policies are not driven by rhetoric, that our policies are also driven by some sort of understanding of the economic underpinnings of our will. And it's clear, Henry, that what we have at the moment is a tension between two worlds. On the one hand, we have the world of security. Security is pretty much a zero-sum game. And that's one part of the equation. And on the other side, we've got the economics, the comparative advantages, the value added. And this is not a zero-sum game. This is more a win-win. So how do we find a new balance between those two worlds, the world of economic and the world of security? This is the task that we have ahead of us. It's true that for many reasons, we probably have to find this new balance. Probably climate and climate resilience is one reason why we have to find this new balance. We have to, businesses understand this very well. They cannot make their value chains, they have to make them climate proof. They've got to invest more on the side of security for climate reasons, and probably be a little bit less efficient, but be more capable to resist the impact of climate change. We have the sector of raw materials, where there is a lot of concentration of production of certain raw materials in very specific locations around the world. and where probably it is fair that countries want a little bit more diversification in order to build a bit more security of sourcing. So this quest for security is an important one. I don't think we can disregard it, but we can also not disregard the other part of the equation, which is the equation about economic efficiency. So we have to find this new balance, and where we put the cursor will matter a lot. So this is, in my view, the conundrum we have today. Obviously, I have not spoken about technology. I'm sure we'll have ample time in this conversation, because the security on the technology, on the technological space, is a very big part of where we have to find this new balance and get it right. If we are to continue to benefit from this win-win that is that can be international trade and that can be open markets.
That's right. Great. Thank you. Thank you, Minister Arancha. Actually, I agree with you. Actually, I found this is very compelling, is that the law of economic, it has its logic, and it has its rhythm, and has its powerful momentum. And so sometimes people want to, think about other things are more important, but actually, as a matter of fact, that the integrated economy, embedded economy of each other is sometimes so resilient. And we can see, actually, until now, we haven't got the Third World War happen. I mean, we are quite dangerous now, but it was because of the trade, investment, people flow, labor flow for the last 70-some years. I mean, that globalization has been really prevented us from the Third World War, and this economic, movement, which is, I think, has made the world more prosperous. It's so important now. And so you mentioned about, we need to really stick to more on the economic and trade, which is absolutely so important. And China is a good example. China has benefited from this global trade and has lifted 800 million people out of poverty. And China joined WTO in 2001. China's GDP has gone, 12 or 13 times. And that is exactly, because of this openness that China has been able to lift 800 million people out of poverty. That was a contribution of the China, but also the world, of trading with China. So what do you see of now we have a regional, trading blocks coming up? I mean, we know WTO is still trying to overcome some challenges, but we see, RCEP, we see CPTPP, we see NAFTA, no, it's USMC, and all those agreement coming up. So how do those regional things, are they going to promote WTO more perform, or are they going to fragment a bit about regional trade? So there's a polar regionalism, and so what do you think about that? And then there's also, we see there's a BRICS countries coming up. There's also Belt and Road. I mean, that more on the infrastructure, but on the trade side. So do you think it's regional, that the free trade agreement, would that be also can be upgraded like CPTPP? Could be another mini WTO. I mean, UK has joined CPTPP now, and China wants to join. So I'm a little puzzling about this two front, and that's what probably the challenge of WTO to have as well. Maybe you can share some of your expert analysis or answer for that. Yeah.
So I would say that what we are seeing is a lot of activity on the let's call them mega regions, right? Big regional agreements. You've mentioned a few in Asia, whether it's RCEP or whether it's CPTPP, which is a mega regional around the Pacific. There are other mega regionals like the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, a big mega regional covering the entire African continent, with this idea that it's very important for African countries to improve intra-Africa trade, which is the lowest in the world in any region, because of the many obstacles that exist still to trade among them. There is also Latin America with an integration of the Latin American continent, but also with the Alliance for the Pacific, with a number of countries in Latin America that are facing the Pacific, have been embarked on. I think all of this is good. It shows that open markets still have a lot of attractiveness. It shows that many countries still feel that it's better to tear down trade barriers than to erect barriers. I think this is a very important signal. And those signals, especially coming from places where international trade was not such a hot topic in the past, like Africa, I think this is a very important signal, because there are other parts of the world where international trade is not very fashionable. Now, the question to me is not so much whether we have to reduce the activity at the mega-regional level. I don't think we should. I think it's good. I think the question is a double one. How can we organize better the coexistence between these different mega-regionals and the WTO? And how can we work to ensure that a number of areas where these mega-regionals are looking at creating rules of the game can be more synergized, so that we don't just open markets at the regional level, but we try to bring all of this in some sort of coherent together, right? So take, for example, a sector like rules on digital trade. A number of these mega-regionals are looking at rules on original digital trade. That's very good, but at some point we're going to have to look at how these different regions can be brought together in some sort of coherent, perhaps, WTO framework. So to me, it's not so much a question of having to choose between regional and multilateral. Is how do we organize this coexistence in a better way? I mean, there is this American expression that I like a lot, which is you have to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. So you've got to be able to walk the regional trade opening, but also chew gum in putting a bit of political energy into the World Trade Organization.
Yeah, that's great, and thank you for that. And talking about the WTO, we know WTO is under a lot of course, pressure. I mean, during the Trump era, and now it's trying to reach more consensus. We know that the WTO ministerial meeting, they have last time they have achieved quite a bit, on the fishery and I don't know the trade investment liberalization and trade, and also the plastic emission to ocean that has also been proposing. Many countries responding. So WTO is really moving towards quite a bit of a new area, like digital, like technology, green environment, and things like that. So what do you see on those new technology area? We're seeing also AI coming up. We see data flows. We have seen many new challenges. There is no consensus in the world now, and so can we really maybe WTO can spearhead a lot of research and building a new theory, or at least summarize the practice, and then try to organize some new reforms on those new consensus. So would you say that this is really the WTO, how they have done those things, and what are the new things to really looking forward for the world to put together? Because otherwise we see different trading bloc does differently, so that could be a challenge as well. I mean, particularly facing those digital economy, data, technology, and investment liberalization.
So what's the lesson we take from the recent success of the World Trade Organization Ministerial Conference? I take a very simple lesson. I take the lesson that when China, the US, the European Union can find points of convergence, they unleash a lot of energy that can lead to a good result. Obviously, they are not the only stakeholders. There are many other stakeholders in the organization. But if these three big parts of international trade, and they represent today, each one of them, 13–14% of international trade. So if these three big trading partners in WTO find a point of convergence, and obviously it's not easy for them to find points of convergence. Let's not, hide where the difficulties are. And let's say that technology is an area and digital trade is an area which is difficult. But if the three of them come to the WTO with the idea that they have to contribute something in order to get something, and that it's better to do this in a cooperative manner than doing it in a conflictual manner, then we have good ingredients to get to a deal. Now, if these three partners are not in the mood for transacting, and transacting doesn't mean agreeing with the other. Transacting means that you have to give a bit of way in order for the other to give a bit of way, and in order for everyone to find an agreement. If the disposition is not there, then it's very difficult for the WTO to get to a result. When three stakeholders that represent the big part of international trade that these three big countries represent today, when they are not in a disposition to get to a result, when they don't come with flexibility, when they do not see the interest in sitting down and negotiating. And again, negotiating is not agreeing with the other. Negotiating is being in a position to give something in order to make sure that the others also give something and we get to a result. That's how you build a trade agreement. So if this disposition is not there, it's going to be very difficult. So the big question is whether these three big partners are ready to answer this in the positive. And that is where, in my view, we have to put a bit of political energy. And it starts again with this idea that doing it as a win-win will be much better than entering into this conversation with a zero-sum mentality.
Good, thank you. And yeah, that's really the case. I think recently, just about a month ago, I hosted the three, as you said, the three largest economies, three largest emitters, and on the climate roundtable. I invited the China climate envoy, Minister Xie Zhenhua, and he's actually going to US now. And then also I invited Nick Burns, American ambassador, and also Ambassador Toledo from EU. So we had a three, China, US, EU on climate. So absolutely, if you got those three biggest economy that can talk together, that will make things easier. So the global trust building among the three particularly are so important, and that's why I'm glad to see so many the international leaders, particularly from European and US, are coming back to China, and also leaders like you, not only political policy but also academic leaders coming back. It's so important. So I think now we would talk about quite a lot about trade. So how do you see the China-EU relation? I mean, you also not only on the WTO but also on the EU, on the foreign side. So we're going to have a China-EU summit pretty soon, and in May we had the Vice President of EU, Joseph Borrell, actually is trying to speak at the CCG. He published his speech at the CCG, which is still, we hope that there will be more strengthening of China-EU relation, because we have the longest civilization. We have a Silk Road that connect us 2,000 years ago, and we don't have any geopolitical ambition with each other. We don't have bordering issues. So how do you think we can strengthen the China-EU relation? Perhaps from a European leader like you, would like to hear from you as well.
So I think there are many reasons why this is an important relation. And it's an important relation both for the EU, but also for China. This is the beginning of this conversation, right? So I think we start from the premise that we can have a good, we are both important to each other, and that how we manage this relation will matter for how much we can translate this potential into reality. And we can see, take climate change, an area that Europe feels very strongly about. And it's not ideological. It's basically because our younger generation in Europe want the fight against climate change to be priority number one. They see this as an existential threat to them. They see this as an intergenerational issue. They think that if we don't take the measures that we should take today to protect our climate, they will be on the short end of the stick. And I'm sure that if we ask this question in China, is exactly the same. So here we have a big space where to build together. Fight against climate change. Now, of course, the fight against climate change means decarbonizing our economies, doing this in a fair manner, making sure that we take into account who's been historically polluting more, who has a historic responsibility, but also being very clear that if we do not translate this desire to reduce emissions today, that's not going to work for tomorrow. So we have there a bigger space where to work together. We care about protecting biodiversity and protecting marine spaces and protecting our polar caps. And I know for a fact that Europe and China have been working together in this space of protecting biodiversity because the two care about it. I know that we care about international trade continuing to be an engine for our respective growth. So I know there are many spaces where we find points of convergence. And I think the task ahead, Henry, for us is to move beyond telling each other nice words and move into taking measures that will translate this desire that we have to strengthen our relationship with concrete action. And this is where we need now to put a bit of effort, taking concrete action. So let me focus on one area that I know best. I like to talk about the areas that I know best and not the areas that I have less knowledge. Take international trade. I think we have the ingredients to make this relationship more solid. But I don't think we're not there yet. If I look at international trade, I see a growing deficit between Europe and China. And I think this can be resolved. I think this can be addressed. But I think we have to move beyond nice words into action. My sense is that we have the possibility to do that. If we want to do that, we can do that. I know that in international trade, we are having tough conversations at the moment. Because, let me be very frank, I think in Europe, there is a desire to keep European markets open. Why? Because it's worked best for us, because a big part of our growth comes from open markets abroad. I think it's the same on the Chinese side. A big part of why China
has been able to prosper is because they have hitched their growth wagon to international open markets. So if this is the case, and I can tell you in Europe we want to continue down that road, then we have to look at how do we address this trade deficit? How can we make sure that European companies are more interested in looking at the Chinese market and continue to be interested in investing in the Chinese market? Because they see there are opportunities here and there are fair opportunities here. How can we make sure that China can continue to access the European market because there are fair opportunities for Chinese companies in Europe? So this is where I think we have work to do. I think we should not avoid talking about the things that are maybe, less nice that we have to deal with. It's better to tell each other how we see it, because this is the beginning of having a conversation to address that.
Oh, actually, thank you for your very constructive suggestion. Actually, I totally agree that actually you talk about the Data Act not supporting. For example, last year we had a historical trade data with US. Also, the data with EU also has gone up on trade. But of course, I understand the our European friends are worried a bit about the trade deficit now that they have it. But that's exactly the point, that maybe we need to strengthen the trade, maybe not de-risking too much, and then also with this subsidy on the clean energy vehicle, we have to be very cautious not to bring that into trade friction, or trade conflict. And so I think certainly we hope to get more technology, sales from EU to China, and I know there are some restrictions. So certainly there could be more done on the Chinese side as well. For example, we have more tourism. We actually had a lot of tourism going to Paris, to Italy, to Spain, and I think the COVID has impact, still recovering on that. But gradually, I'm seeing going to recover. So absolutely, trade and investment and economic activity are the bonds and on the strong ties that we have to maintain, so that and also our share of the supporting for the multilateral system is so important. So I agree that we need to strengthen our trade and also improve our balances, but also relax the restrictions on each side, each other as well. Now, Arancha, I want to change the subject. I know you got a colorful career, very very impressive, and now you are you headed the Spanish government. You also headed WTO international organization. Now you are heading a very famous school of PSIA at the Science Pole now. I had pleasure visiting your school. Thank you for hosting us last time. But it was really very impressive. At heart of the Paris, heart of Europe, such a great number of talents being cultivated under international issues, and you have such a rich experience to direct, educate those international students. So tell us a bit about your school. And I know you have a China office. You have has been a lot of Chinese students also there. And I actually, people here, you are coming. A lot of people say, "Oh, how did you get the dean of Paris, science to your CCG?" There was very very curious. So tell us a bit about your school and how what's your vision, and how you're leading that already for if I remember a year or two already, right? So what's your so far your experience, and how you want to let people know that you are leading a very advanced international school, and where is heading? We were curious.
So I'm very proud to be heading the School of International Affairs in a French university called Sciences Po. It's a university that is 150 years old, and that was founded 150 years ago with this idea that We need universities who think human and social sciences. And look at how important this has become, whether it's the discussion about technology, whether it's the discussion about climate, thus human and social sciences have to be put at the center also of our knowledge. The second characteristic of this university is interdisciplinary. So it's mixing disciplines, which is what we also need today. Take artificial intelligence. It's not just a question of engineers, it's also a question of sociologists, anthropologists, political scientists, economists, experts on governance that need to be brought around the table to better understand how we govern technology. And the third characteristic of this university is it being very international. And this is where Sciences Po has a very strong relationship, very old one, by the way, with China. We have relations with more than 14 universities across China. Of course, here in Beijing, with Beijing University or Tsinghua University, which I'm visiting during my stay in China, but also in Shanghai with Fudan University, but also in other parts of China, whether it's Chongqing or whether it's Wuhan or whether it's Canton. I mean, there is a very strong link between Sciences Po and China. And our desire is very simple, is keep the bridges of people-to-people connection open. If we get more Chinese scholars to come to Sciences Po and understand and share and learn and cross-fertilize, and if we have more and more French students coming to China to do exactly the same, maybe the likelihood that we will build a more solid bottom of our society, a more solid base on which to build political and economic and social ties, there's people to people, is very important to us. So the school that I head in Sciences Po, the school, Paris School of International Affairs, we welcome every year dozens of Chinese, young Chinese, very interested in learning about international affairs, learning about international economy, international development, governance and diplomacy, learning about security and defense, learning about energy transitions or environmental policies. These are all the topics that they understand. But again, with this idea, with this commitment to strengthen people-to-people relationships. We have an office here in Beijing with colleagues that are doing everything they can to convey this message and to appetize Chinese students to look at studying in France. They can study in French, but also in English in France, which shows, again, this commitment to interdisciplinary, international, human and social sciences that is ours in Sciences.
Very, very open, very impressive. You got a very nice campus there. It's so impressive. And I'd like to also maybe because Mabel was very curious about the question. She wants to ask you, and I will ask, because on the women leadership. I mean, also we actually CCG cooperate with UN Women for the last 2 years in a row on the International Women's Day. We had a big round table, and there's a number of minister traders at Beijing different embassies, and they are admirer of you as well. So from professional point of view, that's right. So we are we want more audience to know, and what's the key success factors? I mean, on how you be working internationally, but also making a lot of impact and government, business, and academic. So what's the 3 or whatever key success factors that you have, or your secret or your therapy for others? I mean, or that we can learn from. How to make a woman successful? I mean, what should be done, and particularly for women leadership, where I think we need to know more about. I mean, that's exactly, you know, you are a role model for many people, and that'd be really interesting to know.
Well, thank you, Henry, for this question. And let me tell you that it's a very interesting question to be asked here in Beijing, because it was here in Beijing that all members of the United Nations agreed to end discriminations against women. The Beijing Declaration was signed here. So Beijing is very closely associated with this idea that more equal societies are stronger societies. And this conversation, this is where we have to put this conversation. It's about rights, because it's Article 1 of the UN Charter that says that there shall not be discrimination for reasons of gender, that men and women have equal rights, they should have equal opportunities. But it's a rights issue, but it's also the solidity of our societies, the solidity of our economies, the solidity of our companies or our think tanks comes from letting all these flowers bloom, making sure that every person, including all these women that are there, that are part of our economy, that are part of our businesses, that are in our public administrations, reach also the same level of responsibilities that men have reached. So I'm very adamant that we work, that we take concrete action towards equality, because I think it makes for more solid societies ultimately. And it's not an easy discussion. So how do we make this, how do we take steps forward in that direction? I think what I have found is very important is to frame this conversation. It's not a discussion between women talking with women about women. This is not the point. It is about societies working together. Because if we make this an issue of women against men or men against women, it ends up being a zero-sum game, right? So we end up like geopolitics in a dead end. So we cannot make this a zero-sum game. We have to frame this conversation as being about achieving win-win results. The second thing I would say is that, in my view, what's important is to, wherever we are, whether we are in the government, whether we are in the administration, whether we are in a company, whether we are in a think tank like CCG, is to take steps that we anchor in our processes, that we anchor in our institutions, that we anchor in our rules, in our laws. So not just do good things, but make sure they are part of our governance structures. Because we may go, but those that come after us will be able to benefit from these changes that we have inserted in our governance structures. And the third thing I think is very important is take whatever steps we can to help women that come after us, the younger generation. Work to make sure that we inspire them, we work with them, we give them this advice, or that we take the time to mentor them, to provide them with what we have learned in our careers, the good things and also the less good things and the bad things, because there has also been bad experiences. I mean, I think we can all do that in our respective areas. I certainly do that a lot. I do that a lot in the university. I do that a lot with this younger generation, that they can learn from the path that we have already walked, and to the extent that it helps them, then it's good. So be kind to our other women, as I learned from my great friend Madeleine Albright, who used to say, you know, there is this very special place in hell for women that hate other women. So be kind to other women also.
That's a good advice. Yes, excellent. So probably we still have some time. We will open to our audience and any questions or from the floor and. Okay, we have one at back. Okay.
And thank you so much for excellent speech, Mrs. Gonzalez. And I'm Huiyao He, a research associate from CCG. And as you said, the world is in turbulence in some degree, and China-Europe trade also faces geopolitical pressure. And I would like to know that, in your opinion, what are the key points for China and Europe to promote trade cooperation and also the global governance cooperation? Thank you.
Talk a bit about that, but maybe you could they still interested in how China EU can work on those cooperation issues probably.
Yeah, I think international trade has been a big win-win for both EU and China. And again, for the EU, keeping its markets open and opening the markets of other countries has been a recipe that it has worked well in the past. This obviously had to be accompanied by rules of the game to make sure that this opening was done in a fair manner, that the trade would be conducted in a fair way, and also that we would spend in Europe also in building the social safety net that will help our societies and our workers adjust to the changes that open markets created in Europe. And this is a recipe, again, that has worked well between the EU and China. If I look at China for a moment, when I started my career as a young trade official, China represented 2% of international trade. In my lifetime, China has moved from 2% to 15% of international trade. This is not a small thing. And it worked, obviously, because of a lot of hard work on the Chinese side, a lot of ingenuity, creativity, a lot of hard work that went into China, but it also worked because countries were open to China's insertion into the economy. I think what we hear now in Europe from many European companies is that they would like to trade more with China, they would like to invest more in China, and they are having difficulties to do so. And I'm sure that if I were to sit down with China, I will also get the Chinese side of the story. So I'm not trying to take sides, but I'm trying to explain how in Europe, many companies are feeling today that trading with China is becoming more difficult. And I think it is important when we have differences like this one, which are reflected in the trade figures today. China continues to increase its participation in the European market, but Europe is declining in its participation in its Chinese market. So instead of shouting about this, I think it would be useful to sit down and look at what can be done. And take these complaints that businesses have, and I'm sure that we will have complaints on the Chinese side, don't get me wrong, but that we take steps to address those difficulties. I think we have to be very attentive to overcapacity that is being built. We know that in the past, overcapacity has led to destabilization of international markets. We saw this with steel and aluminum, and we had to, in a way, together take steps to rebalance that. I think there is the potential now for overcapacity in the green technology sector to destabilize international markets in green technology. I think we have to be attentive to addressing these difficulties before they become a trade irritant that transforms into a trade war. So this for the EU-China relationship. And again, in my experience, it's always better to sit down around the table and address the difficulties than go to the media to shout or to do big speeches. Second, on where China and the EU could work together multilaterally. I think China and the EU care about the multilateral trading system. They care about having rules that will help China and the EU keep their markets open, but address a number of questions that have become important, whether it's the link between trade and climate change, whether it's the link between trade and subsidies, whether it's the questions related to national security, whether it's the dispute settlement that both the EU and China care about. Here again, I think it's very important to have a positive agenda to strengthen the World Trade Organization, its rules and its functioning, not just by saying that we care about the multilateral trading system, obviously we do, but taking concrete steps like we did last year when we did an agreement on fisheries subsidies. We have now a few issues that will come up in the next ministerial conference that the United Arab Emirates will host at the beginning of next year. This would be an important moment for the EU and China to together make an effort to advance a number of issues that are on the table, including in the areas that I have mentioned, which in my view would help in building a more solid multilateral trading system.
Great, great. Thank you. Probably have one more question if any other wants to. Yes.
Thank you very much and for your wonderful remarks and your excellent. I want to ask you a question that in your book, you mentioned that make trade happen, make trade work for all. What do you think governments, enterprises, and other global trade participants can do to promote global trade? Thank you very much.
All the groups follow.
No, I think we have to, governments need to be much more attentive to this third part of making trade work for all. Because when there is growing inequalities in countries, or when citizens feel that the social safety nets are not strong enough and they have to save a lot of money because they don't feel safe enough to spend because they know that there are a number of things that they will have to deal with in the future, from healthcare to pensions to, if we do not address this, the legitimacy for open markets will be very difficult. Governments will have pressures from citizens, from businesses to close markets because they will feel that if governments don't do that, they are going to suffer. So we need to find a way to address the concerns from those citizens. Strengthening social safety nets, in my view, is an important, it's an important ingredient. It's an important ingredient across the world. It certainly is the case in Europe. It's the case, a big important discussion to be had in the US, where social safety nets are weaker. And I think it's a very important conversation to be had in China too. So here is a topic where we could see a lot of discussion and a lot of dialogue possible between China, the US, and the EU. How to build more solid social safety nets that will help with managing the maintenance of open markets internationally. This is an area where exchanges between the three would be extremely helpful because I do think that moving forward, this will be a very important ingredient to take into account. Take the case of artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence has an incredible power to address lots of intractable issues, from from diseases for which we had not been able to find cures before. We know that through artificial intelligence, we can look at data and patterns that can lead us to solutions for these diseases. But we also know that artificial intelligence will have an incredibly disruptive effect on labor markets, especially on white-collar labor markets. So we better start looking at reinforcing our social safety nets. Because otherwise, what we will face is another wave of protest from our citizens that will look for protection through trade protectionism. And we know that trade protectionism will not help us in protecting our citizens. So a good discussion on social safety nets, on making trade work for all, as I call it, step number 3 in this trade dance, in my view, is one where there should be a spaces for learning and sharing between US, China, and the EU, together with many others. But in these 3, it's capital because, again, given the sheer size that the 3 represent in the international economy.
Yes, absolutely. Very important. You give a very good suggestion. You know, I mean, to really to get country cooperate more, the government has a lot of role to play, and increasing safety network is such an important issue. So we probably running out of time, and but I would really, you know, thank you, Your Excellency Arancha, for coming to CCG today to give such an excellent book presentation, making trade work for prosperity, people, and planet, which is a new book, and we be, you know, hope to read more on this issue, and maybe we can hope that, you know, publish in China someday too, and we could look into that. And again, you have said many things this morning. We learned a lot. I mean, the law of economics is really, you know, resilient. We have to strengthen that. We could not let the geopolitical disturbs. Open dialogue, you know, let have a lot of things that we can put it on the table, and seeing people face to face to go through the issues, and absolutely increase the trade, increase the economic activity is the way to go. And we have to strengthen regional, you know, encourage regional practice, but also, you know, on the multilateral front, particularly on the WTO, we continue to support, and for that, you know, EU, China, and even US, the 3 largest economy, has a moral responsibility to really do that. So we really appreciate your coming personally to CCG to share your views, and we have a very good record of this, and then we're making transcribe that into future new books on that. But also very important, I think you've been busy in China. You're meeting the different university, your partnership, but also you're going to Shanghai at the import-export, the largest international trade import-export in China, and then we'll also invite you to one of our other section, the resilience of the supply chains, which is another topic we see you sharing in a few days' time. So once again, I appreciate your coming, and also we're probably going to see you again also at the Paris Peace Forum. We're both at steering committee at the Paris Peace Forum, and so I'm glad you came and made your, you know, sharing at the CCG. We appreciate so much. So I don't know if Mabel has anything to say, and yeah, okay, we'll have a little souvenir to show you.